My name is Evelyn, and for the last 10 years, my world has been confined to the four walls of our small suburban house. It's a world that smells of antiseptic wipes and chicken broth, a world measured not in seasons or holidays, but in the 3-hour intervals between my husband Robert's medication schedules. For 10 years, I have been a saint. At least that's what our few remaining friends call me when they visit once or twice a year, their eyes filled with a pity that feels as heavy as a lead blanket. "Oh, Evelyn," they'd say, patting my hand, "you are just a living saint for what you do for Robert." I would always offer a tired smile because what else could I do? He was my husband, the man I had vowed to love in sickness and in health. And for a decade, there had been nothing but sickness. It all started with the accident. A rainy Tuesday, a slick road, and a telephone pole. Robert was pulled from the wreckage with barely a scratch on him. A miracle, the paramedics said. But a week later, the miracle curdled. He woke up one morning and claimed he couldn't feel his legs. The doctors at County General were baffled. They ran every test imaginable: MRIs, CT scans, nerve conduction studies. They found spinal bruising, yes, but nothing that would explain a complete and total paralysis from the waist down. "It's a 1 in a million case," Dr. Matthews had told me, his face a mask of professional sympathy. "The trauma can sometimes cause the brain to shut down communication with the limbs. We've seen it before. Sometimes it resolves on its own, sometimes it doesn't." It didn't. Robert never walked again. My life, as I knew it, ended that day. I was 55, a respected head nurse with 25 years of experience, just a few years shy of a comfortable retirement. I gave it all up. I had to. Robert needed full-time care, and we couldn't afford a private facility, not with our modest savings. So my starched white uniforms were replaced with comfortable sweatpants, my bustling hospital corridors with the silent hallway of our home, and my professional skills were repurposed for an audience of one. Every morning begins at 5:30 a.m. I wake up, tiptoe to the bathroom, and then begin the ritual. First, I check his catheter bag. Then I prepare his morning cocktail of pills: blood thinners, nerve blockers, muscle relaxants, and a whole host of vitamins he insisted were essential for his recovery. I'd blend a protein shake because he claimed chewing solid food in the morning was too exhausting. Then came the hardest part: the transfer. Robert was not a small man. Even after 10 years of muscle atrophy, he was a dead weight of 200 pounds. Using a hydraulic lift I'd bought with a second mortgage on our house, I would hoist his limp body from the bed and into his state-of-the-art $1,000 wheelchair. Then I would bathe him, dress him, and wheel him into the living room, positioning him perfectly in front of the large bay window that overlooked the garden I no longer had time to tend. This routine, this back-breaking, soul-crushing routine, was the testament of my love. It was my daily prayer, my sacrifice at the altar of our marriage. Our savings bled out slowly, painfully. His specialized bed cost $5,000. The renovations to make the house wheelchair accessible cost another $15,000. Then there were the alternative therapies he'd find on the internet. A homeopathic healer in Arizona who charged $200 for a phone consultation. A special magnetic mattress from Germany that cost $3,000 and did absolutely nothing. "We have to try, Ev," he'd plead, his eyes wide and hopeful. "What if this is the one thing that works?" And I, the fool, would drain another few thousand from our retirement account, clinging to the same sliver of hope. I loved him. I loved the man he had been, and I was determined to honor that man, no matter the cost. Yesterday was our 35th wedding anniversary. I tried to make it special. I cooked his favorite meal, pot roast, and pureed it so he could eat it easily. I bought a small cupcake and put a single candle in it. I sat across from him, holding his soft, unused hand. "Happy anniversary, my love," I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking. He gave me a weak smile. "You're a good woman, Evelyn," he whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. "The best. I don't know what I'd do without you." His words were meant to be a comfort, but they landed like a stone in my gut. He would be nothing without me. He was right. And I, in turn, had become nothing but his caregiver. Today, something shifted. It started with a persistent leak in the attic. With a heavy sigh, I pulled down the rickety ladder, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the bare bulb. I hadn't been up there in years. It was a museum of our forgotten life. Boxes of old baby clothes, my nursing school textbooks, photo albums from vacations we took when walking was something we did together. As I moved a stack of old magazines, my hand brushed against a loose floorboard. Curiosity, an emotion I hadn't felt in a long time, pricked at me. I pried it open. Underneath, nestled in the insulation, was a simple brown envelope. It wasn't dusty. It had been placed there recently. My name wasn't on it. Nothing was. My heart began to beat a little faster. It was probably just some old forgotten documents, but my hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside wasn't documents. It was a stack of glossy photographs. The first one stole the air from my lungs. It was Robert. He was standing. Not just standing, but leaning casually against the bar of a loud, crowded tavern, a place I'd never seen before. He was holding a glass of whiskey, a confident smirk on his face that I hadn't seen in a decade. He looked healthy, strong. In his other arm, he held a young woman with bleached blonde hair, her hand resting possessively on his chest. I felt a wave of nausea. It had to be an old photo, a cruel joke. I flipped it over. The date stamp, printed in neat digital numbers, read, September 28th, 2025, last Saturday. The day I was at home cleaning his bedpan and measuring out his heart medication. I dropped the first photo and snatched the next. This one was even worse. It was Robert, my paralyzed husband, behind the wheel of a cherry-red Mustang convertible, a car I never knew he owned. The wind was whipping through his hair as he laughed, his head thrown back in pure joy. The blonde was in the passenger seat, her face alight with adoration. The last photo was the one that broke me. It was them again, but this time they were on a beach. Robert was shirtless, his body tanned and muscular, not the pale, atrophied flesh I washed every single morning. He was holding the woman's hand, walking along the shoreline. Walking. He was walking. The photograph slipped from my nerveless fingers, scattering across the dusty floorboards of the attic. The world tilted on its axis. A roaring sound filled my ears, blocking out all thought. 10 years. 10 years of my life, of my body, of my money, of my love, all of it, a lie. Every single pill, every transfer from the bed, every pureed meal, every whispered prayer for his recovery, a lie. He hadn't been a patient, he had been a parasite, and I had been his willing host. Downstairs, I heard a small bell ring, the one Robert used to summon me when he needed something, a glass of water. The TV remote changed, his pillow fluffed. For 10 years, I had run every time I heard that bell. But now, standing in the dusty attic surrounded by the evidence of his monstrous betrayal, I didn't move. The ringing stopped. A moment of silence. Then I heard his voice, no longer weak and raspy, but sharp and impatient, echo up through the floor. "Evelyn, where are you? Get down here." His voice, sharp and demanding, sliced through the thick fog of my shock. "Evelyn, get down here." For a moment, my legs refused to obey. My mind was a maelstrom of betrayal and fury, but a lifetime of conditioning. 10 long years of responding to his every beck and call took over. I moved on autopilot. My hands, still trembling, gathered the scattered photographs. I slid them back into the brown envelope and carefully replaced the loose floorboard covering the grave of my marriage. I took a deep, shuddering breath, wiped the tears and dust from my cheeks, and composed my face into the familiar mask of placid servitude. The saint had to make one more appearance. As I descended the attic ladder, each step felt heavier, as if I were walking into a different life, a darker one. By the time my feet touched the hallway floor, the hurt had begun to crystallize into something hard and cold. Anger. I walked into the living room. He was sitting in his wheelchair exactly where I had left him, framed by the light of the bay window. He had a petulant look on his face, the look of a king whose servant was late with his grapes. "There you are," he snapped. "What took you so long? I need a glass of water. My throat is dry." I looked at him. I really looked at him for the first time in 10 years. Before, I had seen a patient, a victim, my poor, helpless husband. Now I saw a stranger. I saw a con artist. My nurse's eyes, trained to observe the smallest details, began to see the things my loving wife's heart had refused to acknowledge. I saw the subtle, healthy color in his cheeks, not the pale, waxy complexion of a long-term invalid. I saw the strength in his shoulders and arms, which I had always attributed to him propelling his own wheelchair around the house. Now I saw it for what it was, the toned physique of an active man. His hands, which I held and lotioned every night, weren't the soft, doughy hands of a paralyzed man. They were calloused and strong. And his eyes were the worst. They weren't dull with chronic pain or vacant with despair. They were sharp, alert, and right now they were filled with an arrogant impatience that made my stomach churn. This man wasn't a prisoner in his own body. He was a warden, and I was his sole inmate. "Of course, dear," I said, my voice eerily calm. I went to the kitchen, my mind racing. The photos were the truth. My entire reality had been a meticulously crafted lie. He had not only deceived me, but he had also made me his accomplice, his slave. I filled a glass with water and brought it to him. As I handed it to him, I let my fingers slip, and the glass tumbled, not onto the floor, but onto his lap, spilling ice-cold water all over his legs and the blanket that covered them. "Oh, clumsy me," I exclaimed, my voice a pitch-perfect imitation of concern. I watched him like a hawk. I was looking for the slightest flicker of a reaction, an involuntary clench of a thigh muscle, a reflexive jerk, any sign that the sudden, icy shock had registered. Nothing. His legs remained completely still beneath the wet wool. He didn't even flinch. He just looked down with disgust and then up at me. "Evelyn, for God's sake, look what you've done. Now you'll have to change my trousers. And this blanket is soaked. Honestly, you're getting so careless in your old age." His control was absolute. The discipline it must have taken not to react sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. He had practiced this. He had perfected his role over 10 long years. This wasn't just a lie, it was a masterpiece of deception. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in my bed, which had been moved to the small guest room a decade ago, to make his room more accessible, and I listened to his steady, peaceful snores from across the hall, the snores of a man without a conscience. My grief was gone, burned away by the white-hot fire of my rage. My mind, the analytical, methodical mind of a head nurse, took over. I stopped asking why and started asking how. How did he fool the doctors? He must have bribed someone, or perhaps the initial diagnosis of functional neurological disorder was vague enough for him to exploit. How did he manage the money for his secret life? The alternative therapies, the cash for his women and his cars? It had to be our savings. At 2 a.m., I crept out of bed and went to my small office. I powered on our old desktop computer. For years, Robert had insisted we do all our banking the old-fashioned way, with paper statements claiming the internet was too confusing for him. Now I knew why. I logged into our joint savings account for the first time. The numbers on the screen confirmed my fears. It was a bloodbath. 10 years ago, we'd had nearly $200,000, a nest egg I had carefully built. Now, there was just under $17,000 left. I scrolled through the transaction history. It was a litany of his lies. Thousands of dollars transferred to accounts I didn't recognize. Huge cash withdrawals from ATMs in cities he had supposedly never visited. A recurring monthly payment of $2,000 listed simply as leasing. The cherry red Mustang, no doubt. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when I found a link to view associated credit card accounts. There was one under his name I'd never seen before. The statement was a roadmap of his betrayal: dinners at fancy steakhouses, charges from a liquor store every Friday night, payments to a motel just 2 towns over, and a charge from a jewelry store 3 weeks ago for a diamond bracelet that certainly wasn't for me. He hadn't just been living, he had been thriving, living his best life, all funded by my hard-earned retirement savings, while I was at home pureeing his pot roast. I closed the laptop, the faint glow illuminating my face in the dark room. The scale of his cruelty was breathtaking. He hadn't just wanted freedom, he had wanted me to be his prisoner while he enjoyed it. He had sentenced me to 10 years of hard labor for a crime I didn't commit. A simple divorce would have been too kind. Exposing him with the photographs would be satisfying, yes, but it felt insufficient. It would be a momentary humiliation. It wouldn't give me back the decade he stole from me. It wouldn't repay the nights I spent rubbing his lifeless feet, praying for a miracle. No, he didn't deserve a quick ending. He deserved to understand. He deserved to truly feel the prison he had so carefully constructed for me. My eyes drifted to the weekly pill organizer on the kitchen counter, its little plastic boxes neatly filled with the pills I prepared for him every Sunday. He trusted me implicitly. He put whatever I gave him into his mouth without a second thought. I was his caregiver, his nurse, his saint. I held his life in my hands every single day. The realization washed over me not with horror, but with a profound, chilling sense of power. My greatest weakness, my role as his devoted nurse, was about to become my greatest strength. I went back to my office and pulled my old nursing textbooks from the shelf. Pharmacology, toxicology, neurology. I spent the next 3 hours reading, my mind sharper and more focused than it had been in years. I wasn't looking for a poison, not something that would kill him. That would be too merciful. I was looking for something subtle, something elegant. I was searching for a specific class of medication, a non-depolarizing neuromuscular blocking agent, a drug that, when administered in small, steady oral doses, wouldn't show up in a standard blood panel, a drug that wouldn't cause a single jolt of pain. It would simply block the nerve signals from reaching the muscles. It would start with a pleasant feeling of heaviness, a slight weakness in the fingers and toes. Then, over weeks, as the dose accumulated in his system, it would spread. His arms would grow heavy, his speech would begin to slur, and finally his legs, his strong, healthy, dancing legs, would simply stop responding to his commands. I was going to give him exactly what he pretended to have. I was going to turn his lie into a terrifying, inescapable reality. And the best part? He would be awake and fully conscious for every single moment of it. The path from knowledge to action is a short one for a woman with nothing left to lose. The saint was dead, buried in the dust of the attic next to the ghosts of my happy memories. In her place stood a nurse, a clinician with a singular, chillingly clear objective. My target was the man snoring peacefully across the hall. My weapon of choice was a compound I knew from my ICU days, a drug used in controlled settings to induce temporary muscle paralysis for certain surgeries. Orally, its effects were slower, more insidious. It was perfect. The only problem was obtaining it. It wasn't something you could buy over the counter. My mind immediately went to David Chen, a pharmacist I had worked with for 15 years at County General. He was a kind, meticulous man who had always respected my clinical judgment. We'd kept in touch sporadically after my retirement, exchanging Christmas cards and the occasional email. A plan formed in my mind, a story built on a foundation of half-truths that would be entirely believable coming from me. I waited until 10 a.m., a respectable morning hour, and dialed his personal cell number. "Evelyn, what a surprise! How are you holding up?" His voice was warm, filled with the same genuine sympathy everyone else offered. It was the perfect opening. "Oh, David, I'm managing," I said, carefully injecting a note of weary resignation into my voice. "It's Robert, you know. It never gets easier." I let out a soft, practiced sigh. "Actually, that's partly why I'm calling. It's a bit strange, and I hope you don't think I'm crazy." "Of course not, Ev. Anything. What's on your mind?" "Well," I began, weaving my fiction, "I've been trying to keep my mind active, to stop myself from dwelling. I've been reading some of my old medical journals, and I've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole researching functional neurological disorders, like Robert's. I'm thinking of writing a paper, a case study. Just for myself, really. There's a specific neuromuscular agent I remember us using, dantrolene sodium, but in a modified form. I want to study its crystalline structure for a chapter on cellular absorption. Do you have any expired or damaged batches you're scheduled to dispose of? A few grams would be more than enough for my microscope slides. It's purely for academic purposes." The lie was elaborate, layered with just enough medical jargon to sound authentic. Mentioning an expired batch was key. It removed the ethical dilemma of diverting active medication. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I held my breath. "For a research paper, you say?" David finally asked. "That's wonderful, Evelyn. It's good to keep the mind sharp. Let me check. We did have a batch that was compromised by a temperature fluctuation in the stockroom last month. It's slated for incineration. I'm sure I could sign out a small sample for educational purposes. For you, anything." Relief washed over me, cold and absolute. "David, you're a lifesaver," I said, my voice thick with fake gratitude. "You have no idea what this means to me." Oh, but I did. I knew exactly what it meant. 2 days later, a discreet package arrived by courier. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was a small vial of white powder. The weapon had been secured. That Sunday evening, I performed my weekly ritual of filling Robert's pill organizer. The 7 plastic containers, labeled with the days of the week, lay open on the kitchen table like a disassembled snake. It was the same routine I had performed over 500 times, but this time was different. My hands were perfectly steady. My heart was a cold, rhythmic drum. There was no hesitation. I took a tiny amount of the white powder, a carefully measured dose based on my calculations of his body weight and desired onset time, and crushed it further with the back of a spoon. I mixed the fine powder into the capsule of his largest vitamin supplement, a B-complex pill. The white powder was indistinguishable from the original contents. I placed the doctored capsule into the slot for Monday morning, then filled the rest of the organizer as usual. The trap was set. The next morning, I watched him from the kitchen doorway as he took his pills. He tossed the handful into his mouth, followed by a large gulp of the protein shake I had prepared, and swallowed without a second thought. The first domino had fallen. The following weeks were an exercise in supreme self-control. I was the very picture of the doting wife, but my mind had become a clinical observation deck. I started a new journal, a small black notebook I kept hidden in a hollowed-out copy of War and Peace. On its pages, I didn't write about my feelings. I wrote patient notes. Day 1, initial dose administered. Subject displays no immediate effects. Mood, arrogant, demanding. Day 7, 7th dose administered. Subject continues normal routine. Secret credit card bill arrived. Subject spent $400 on a steak dinner for 2 last Tuesday. Day 15, 15th dose administered. Subject complained of unusual fatigue, attributed to poor sleep. Observation. Objective achieved. Subject is internalizing initial symptoms as part of his existing condition. I became an actress of the highest caliber. I massaged his strong, healthy legs with lotion, cooing with sympathy. "Don't you worry, my love. We'll get the feeling back one day." All the while, I was methodically, patiently, taking that feeling away. The first tangible sign appeared in the 3rd week. We were in the living room, watching his favorite game show. He reached for the TV remote on the side table, and his fingers, usually so nimble when he thought I wasn't looking, fumbled. The remote clattered to the floor. "Damn it," he grumbled, a flash of genuine frustration on his face. My fingers feel puffy, stiff. He flexed his hand, a puzzled look in his eyes. I rushed over, my face a perfect canvas of concern. "Oh, Robert, let me see." I picked up the remote and handed it to him, then began gently massaging his hand. "It's probably just the nerve pain acting up, honey. Maybe a change in the weather." He seemed to accept the explanation, but I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Not suspicion, but fear. For the first time in a decade, he had experienced a real, involuntary physical symptom. He couldn't know it was the opening salvo in a war he was already losing. Inside, my heart sang a cold, triumphant song. It was working. His arrogance, however, remained his defining trait. A week later, he provided me with the perfect stage for my final act. He called me to his side, his expression one of profound melancholy. "Evelyn," he began, his voice low and dramatic. "It's been 10 years. 10 years since that terrible day. I've been thinking, we never properly marked my survival. We never celebrated the fact that I'm still here, thanks to you." He looked at me, his eyes shining with counterfeit emotion. "I want to throw a party, a decade of resilience party. I want to see everyone, our friends, the neighbors. I want them to see that I'm not beaten, that we're not beaten." I stared at him, my mind reeling at the sheer audacity of the man. He wanted a party to celebrate his lie. He wanted to sit in his throne-like wheelchair and receive accolades for his bravery, all while basking in the glow of my reflected sainthood. He wanted an audience for his grand performance, and I realized, with a surge of adrenaline, that I did too. "Robert," I said, my voice catching as if I were overcome with emotion, "that is the most wonderful idea you've had in years." His face lit up. "You think so?" "I know so," I confirmed, taking his hand. "You deserve it. You deserve to be celebrated." He beamed, completely oblivious. "It will be a lot of work for you, Ev." "Nothing is too much work for you, my love," I said, the words tasting like poison and victory. "I'll handle everything." That evening, I sat at my desk and began to write out the invitations. My handwriting was neat and clear. I invited everyone. The neighbors who whispered about my sainthood behind their hands, our old friends who had drifted away, even Robert's weekly poker buddies, the ones he secretly met every Thursday night, the ones he told me had moved away years ago. I would invite them all. The date was set for 1 month from today. I circled it on the calendar in bright red ink. It wasn't just the date of the party, it was the day of judgment. The stage was being set. The actors were being summoned, and the final act of Robert's long performance was about to begin. The month leading up to the party was the most alive I had felt in a decade. On the surface, I was a whirlwind of domestic activity. I was on the phone for hours coordinating with caterers, ordering a celebratory cake, and personally calling every single person on our old, dusty Christmas card list. I wanted a full house. I wanted every corner of our small home to be filled with witnesses. Each phone call was a small performance. "Oh, it's been so long," I'd chirp to a former neighbor. "Robert is just so excited to see everyone. He's been so brave, you know. His spirits are remarkably high." Every word was a carefully placed stone in the mosaic of my revenge. The guests gushed, promising to be there to honor the strongest man and the most devoted wife they knew, if they only knew. Beneath this flurry of party planning, my real work continued with the cold precision of a surgeon. Every morning, another doctored capsule. Every evening, another entry in my black notebook. The changes were no longer subtle. By the second week of my new regimen, Robert's complaints about stiffness in his hands had evolved into a noticeable tremor. He had trouble holding his coffee cup, his knuckles white as he tried to keep it steady. One morning, he dropped his fork 3 times during breakfast, clattering loudly on the linoleum floor. After the 3rd time, He slammed his fist on the arm of his wheelchair, a genuine, impotent rage flashing in his eyes. "What the hell is wrong with me?" he roared, his voice thick with frustration. "My hands feel like they're not mine anymore." I knelt beside him, picking up the fork and gently wiping a fleck of scrambled egg from his chin. My touch was soft, my voice a soothing balm. "It's okay, my love. It's just a bad day. The doctor said we could expect flare-ups. Don't strain yourself." I proceeded to feed him the rest of his breakfast, spoonful by spoonful, just as I had done thousands of times. But this time, it was different. Before, I was feeding a helpless man. Now, I was feeding my prisoner, and the trembling in his hands was the first sign that the walls of his cell were becoming real. His fear began to curdle his arrogance. By the third week, the weakness had crept from his hands into his arms. He could no longer propel his wheelchair across the living room without becoming breathless and exhausted. He spent most of his days parked in front of the window, his expression growing more sullen and terrified. The confident smirk from the photograph was gone, replaced by the pinched, frightened face of a man who was losing control, the ultimate horror for a master manipulator. One afternoon, he demanded I call Dr. Matthews. "Something is wrong, Evelyn. This isn't the normal progression. I feel weak, all over. Call him now." I complied with a placid smile. I sat beside him and put the phone on speaker. "Doctor." Matthew's voice filled the room, calm and professional. Robert, his own voice now laced with a slight but noticeable slur, described his new symptoms. The tremors, the profound weakness, the slurring of his words. I listened, my face a mask of wifely concern. "Robert, it's not unusual for patients with severe FND to experience somatic shifts," Dr. Matthews explained patiently. "The mind is a powerful thing. You have a big event coming up, this party. It's possible the emotional stress and excitement are manifesting as new physical symptoms. It's your brain's way of processing the anxiety." He was using Robert's own fabricated diagnosis, the very lie he had hidden behind for a decade, to explain away his very real, medically induced decline. It was poetic. Robert started to protest, to say it felt different, real, but Dr. Matthews gently cut him off. "Let's not panic, Robert. Let's increase your dose of muscle relaxants for a week and see if that helps calm the system down. Evelyn, you'll take care of that?" "Of course, doctor," I said, my voice dripping with devotion. "Whatever Robert needs." After I hung up, Robert was silent, his face pale. He was trapped. Who could he turn to? If he confessed to a doctor that he'd been faking for 10 years, he'd be a pariah, a fraud, and still be left with a terrifying, real illness. His perfect crime had left him with no alibi. The calls started in the 4th week. His secret phone, a cheap burner I'd found tucked away in his closet, would vibrate at odd hours. I had started keeping it in my apron pocket. The caller ID was always the same: Tiffany, the blonde from the photos. I let it ring the first few times, but one afternoon while I was adjusting Robert's pillow, it buzzed insistently. I looked at Robert, whose eyes darted towards the sound, a desperate, hunted look on his face. I smiled sweetly at him, pulled the phone from my pocket, and answered. "Hello?" I said, my voice crisp and professional. There was a surprised silence, then a young woman's hesitant voice. Hello? Is Rob there?" "To whom am I speaking?" I asked, adopting the detached tone I used to use on the nursing floor. "This is Tiffany, a friend. I need to speak to him. It's important." "I'm afraid Mr. Hayes is not available," I said coolly. "He's been very unwell lately and is under strict doctor's orders to rest. I'm his full-time nurse, Evelyn. I'm handling all his affairs. I can take a message, but he won't be able to return your call." I could hear her panicked breathing. "Unwell? What do you mean? He was fine last month. Is he okay?" I glanced at Robert. His face was a mess of terror and rage. He was trying to speak, to scream, but the slurring was worse now. Ev, no," was all he could manage. "I'm sorry," I said into the phone, my voice dripping with false empathy. "But his condition is quite severe. He's not really capable of conversation at the moment. I'll be sure to tell him you called." I hung up before she could respond and turned off the phone, severing his last link to his other life. I looked at Robert. Tears of sheer, impotent fury were streaming down his face. You, he stammered, his lips barely forming the words. "I'm just taking care of you, dear," I said, patting his hand, "just like I always have." I was his whole world now. The four walls of our house had become the true and only boundaries of his existence. The day before the party, the final pieces fell into place. The caterers had confirmed. The house was spotless, decorated with cheerful balloons and streamers that seemed to mock the grim reality of the situation. I had given Robert his final, slightly increased dose that morning. The effects were now profound. He could barely lift his own head. His speech was a series of unintelligible mumbles. All he could do was sit in his chair and watch me with eyes that burned with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew I was responsible, and he could do absolutely nothing about it. That evening, I stood in the doorway of the living room looking at him. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor. He was slumped in his chair, a pathetic, helpless figure. The great actor's performance was finally over, but the nightmare had just begun. "Big day tomorrow, my love," I said softly, my voice filled with a perfect, loving excitement. "Everyone is so eager to see you, to tell you how brave you are." His only response was a low, guttural moan from deep in his chest. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The curtain was about to rise on my masterpiece. The day of the party arrived, bright and cruelly cheerful. I dressed Robert in his finest clothes, a cashmere sweater and pressed trousers. It was like dressing a life-size doll. His limbs were heavy and unresponsive, his body pliant under my touch. The only sign of the man within was in his eyes. They followed my every move, wide with a silent, screaming terror. He knew what today was. He didn't know how the end would come, but he could feel the cold shadow of the executioner's axe. I wheeled him into the living room, now filled with flowers and balloons, and positioned him at the head of the room, his throne of lies. I placed a party hat with an elastic string under his chin. He looked utterly pathetic. He looked perfect. The guests began to arrive at 2:00, a flood of familiar faces, all wearing the same expression of gentle pity. They flocked to Robert first, drawn to the spectacle of the tragic hero. "Robert, you're an inspiration," said Mr. Gable from down the street, clapping him on a shoulder that was real, solid muscle under the cashmere. 10 years. I don't know how you do it, old boy." Robert's mouth moved, a wet, garbled sound escaping his lips. Mrs. Gable leaned in. "Oh, listen to him," she whispered to her husband. "He's trying to thank you. He's just so overcome with emotion." I played my part, the saintly hostess, a serene smile fixed on my face. I brought them drinks, offered them canapes, and accepted their endless praise. "Evelyn, you're an angel," said my old friend Carol, hugging me tightly. "Truly, an angel on this earth, the way you've sacrificed everything for him." "He's my husband, Carol," I said, my voice a soft murmur. "You do what you have to do for love." The house was buzzing with a counterfeit joy. Everyone was celebrating a lie, a grand fiction that had consumed a decade of my life. I moved through the crowd, a ghost at my own party, watching the performance from the outside. Robert just sat there, his head slumped slightly to one side, the party hat askew. He was the guest of honor at his own funeral. At 3:00, the second part of my plan arrived. I had timed the invitations perfectly. The doorbell rang, and I opened it to find 3 men in their late 60s, looking slightly confused. It was Frank, Bill, and Sammy, Robert's poker buddies. "Evelyn," said Frank, a large man with a booming voice. "Thanks for the invite. We were so surprised to hear from you. We figured you guys were just, you know, "It's so good to see you," I said, ushering them in. "Robert will be so thrilled you're here." They walked into the living room and their faces lit up when they saw Robert. "Rob, you old son of a gun," Bill shouted, striding over and slapping his knee, a knee that Robert supposedly couldn't feel. "Look at you, it's been ages. We thought you moved away or something after you stopped coming to the Thursday game." A confused silence fell over the guests closest to them. Mrs. Gable turned from her conversation. "Thursday game? But Robert hasn't left the house in 10 years. Frank laughed, oblivious. "He hasn't. He was at the game just last month. Cleaned us out, too. Said he was investing his winnings in some alternative therapies." He winked. "Looked good, too. Been working out, Rob?" The air grew thick with confusion. Whispers started to ripple through the room. People looked from the vibrant, laughing men to the drooling, catatonic figure in the wheelchair. I saw the dawning horror on their faces. It was time. I picked up a champagne flute and gently tapped it with a spoon. The light, cheerful sound cut through the murmuring. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Could I have your attention for just a moment?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. I walked to the center of the room and stood beside Robert's wheelchair, placing one hand lovingly on his shoulder. His whole body stiffened at my touch. "Thank you all so much for being here," I began, my voice filled with warmth. "It means the world to both of us to have you here to celebrate this milestone. 10 years. 10 years my husband has sat in this chair, facing every day with a courage that has been my greatest inspiration." I paused, letting the sentiment hang in the air. I looked around the room, making eye contact with our friends, our neighbors. For 10 years, I have been his hands, his feet, his caregiver, and I did it gladly, out of love. I, like all of you, believed his strength was in his spirit, but recently I discovered that my husband's resilience is far greater than any of us could have possibly imagined. In fact, what I discovered can only be described as a miracle. I reached into the pocket of my apron and pulled out the brown envelope. The room was deathly quiet. You see, I always worried about Robert being confined to this house. I thought he never got to see the world, but it turns out I was wrong. I'd like to share some recent photographs of my husband's incredible, secret recovery. I walked first to Carol, my oldest friend. I pulled out the first photograph, Robert at the bar, a confident smirk on his face, the blonde in his arms. I held it in front of her. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. She looked from the photo to Robert and back again. "As you can see," I said, my voice resonating in the silence, "he's been engaging in some very rigorous physical therapy." I moved to the Gables, showing them the next photo, Robert laughing behind the wheel of the cherry red Mustang. He's also been exploring alternative forms of transportation. He always loved to drive. A wave of gasps and horrified whispers followed me as I moved through the room, a grim angel of revelation, displaying the evidence of his secret life. I showed them the final photo, the one of him walking on the beach, strong and tanned. And he's even managed to take vacations, all while I was at home, managing what I thought was our dwindling savings. The atmosphere in the room had curdled from celebration to a kind of horrified, fascinated disgust. Everyone was staring at Robert, this man they had pitied and admired, who was now exposed as a monstrous fraud. They were looking at me, too, their faces a mixture of pity and awe. The saint had shed her halo, and in its place was a crown of thorns and a sword of vengeance. I returned to the center of the room, standing over my husband. He was shaking, a low, keening sound vibrating in his chest. "The only sickness my husband has suffered from for the past 10 years, I announced, my voice ringing with absolute finality, is a sickness of the soul, a rot of greed and deceit. He sentenced me to a decade of hard labor so he could live like a king. He made me his warden, his nurse, and his fool. Well, tonight, I am officially retiring." Just as the last word left my mouth, The doorbell rang, shrill and insistent. A few guests standing near the door opened it hesitantly. A young woman with bleached blonde hair and a furious expression on her face pushed her way inside. Tiffany. "Where is he?" she shrieked, her eyes scanning the crowd. "Where is Rob? He's not answering his phone." Her eyes finally landed on the pathetic figure in the wheelchair, her face contorted in confusion. "Rob? What's wrong with you? What's going on?" Then she saw the photos, still being passed from hand to shocked hand. Her eyes widened in horror as she realized what was happening. Her secret lover, her sugar daddy, was not the man he claimed to be, and his two worlds had just collided in the most spectacular, disastrous way imaginable. I stood there, calm amidst the beautiful chaos I had created, and for the first time in a very long time, I smiled a real, genuine smile. The explosion of two colliding worlds was both everything I had hoped for and more chaotic than I could have imagined. Tiffany, her face a mask of fury and disbelief, stood in the center of the room, the unwilling star in a drama she had just discovered she was a part of. She pointed a trembling, acrylic-nailed finger at the slumped figure in the wheelchair. "Rob, what is this? Who are these people? And what the hell is wrong with you?" Her shrill voice cut through the stunned silence. Frank, the poker buddy, stepped forward, a look of dawning comprehension on his face. He picked up one of the photos from a nearby table. "Wait a minute," he boomed, his voice silencing the room again. "This is the picture you showed me last month, Rob, the one of your niece you took on your business trip to the coast." He turned to Tiffany. "Honey, I think you've been played. This man's wife," he said, gesturing to me with a respectful nod, "has been at home taking care of what we all thought was a paralyzed man." Tiffany's face went from white to red in a heartbeat. The realization hit her not as grief, but as pure, unadulterated rage. She wasn't the secret lover of a wealthy, tragic hero. She was the mistress of a lying, middle-aged fraud who was now, it seemed, genuinely incapacitated, and by the looks of it, not wealthy at all. She let out a scream of frustration and grabbed a half-eaten piece of cake from the coffee table, hurling it at Robert. It struck him squarely in the chest, leaving a smear of buttercream on his cashmere sweater. "You bastard!" she shrieked. "You told me she was a shrew! You told me you were miserable! You promised me a trip to Hawaii!" With one last look of utter contempt, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Her exit broke the spell. The party was officially over. The guests, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire of this domestic war, began to flee. They offered me hurried, awkward condolences, their eyes avoiding mine. "Evelyn, if you need anything," Mr. Gable started before his wife pulled him away. "Let's go, Harold. This is a private matter." They scurried out, their faces burning with the embarrassment of having been so thoroughly duped. Within 10 minutes, the house was empty. The silence that descended was profound, broken only by a low, pathetic whimper from the wheelchair. I walked through the debris of the party, crushed napkins, half-empty glasses, and the sad, deflating balloons. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a large glass of water, drinking it down in one long gulp. My work was not yet finished. I returned to the living room and knelt in front of my husband, looking directly into his terrified, hate-filled eyes. "Well," I said, my voice quiet and even, "that was quite a party." He made a gurgling sound, his mouth working uselessly. "You're probably wondering what's happening to you," I continued, my tone conversational, as if I were discussing the weather. "You're feeling weak, aren't you? Your muscles aren't obeying. It's a frightening feeling to be a prisoner in your own body. I would know. I've been watching you do it for 10 years. I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. "But your prison was a lie. Mine is very real. I know because I built it for you. What you're feeling, Robert, is the result of a carefully administered dose of a neuromuscular blocking agent. A medical marvel, really. I've been putting it in your vitamins for the last 6 weeks." I saw a flicker of comprehension in his eyes, quickly followed by a new, deeper wave of terror. "I am a very good nurse, Robert," I said, picking a piece of cake off his sweater. "Meticulous. I calculated the dosage perfectly, enough to induce a slow, progressive paralysis, but not enough to cause any permanent damage. It's temporary, of course. In 2, maybe 3 months, the effects will wear off completely. You'll be able to walk, talk, and drive your little red car again. But by then, there will be nothing left for you here." I stood up and walked over to the mantelpiece, picking up a thick legal envelope. "I met with a lawyer last week, a very good one. He was fascinated by my story. He helped me file for divorce on the grounds of extreme cruelty and financial fraud. He also helped me drain our joint savings account, or what was left of it anyway, $17,000. I think of it as my severance pay. 10 years of backbreaking work comes to about $2 an hour. I'm probably undervaluing myself, but I'm not a greedy woman." I tossed the envelope into his lap. "Those are your copies. The house is being put on the market tomorrow. Luckily for me, my parents left it to me in their will, so my name is the only one on the deed. You will be served the eviction notice as soon as you are capable of signing for it. As for your things, I'll have them packed and sent to a storage unit. Tiffany might know of a cheap motel you can stay in. You'll need to find a job, of course. I hear the Mustang is fun to drive, but the insurance must be a killer." I looked at him one last time, this stranger who had shared my bed and stolen my life. There was no hatred left in me, only a vast, empty peace. I had balanced the scales. "You built a cage for me, Robert," I said softly, "but you forgot to lock the door, and you taught me something invaluable. You taught me that a cage is not a home." With that, I turned my back on him. I went to my room, where a single suitcase was already packed. I took my purse, my car keys, and walked to the front door. I didn't look back. I stepped out into the cool evening air. It smelled of cut grass and freedom. I got into my old, reliable sedan, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb without a single glance in the rearview mirror. 3 months later, I was living in a small, sunny apartment in a town by the ocean, 200 miles away. I had a small garden on my balcony where I grew tomatoes and basil. I had reconnected with my sister and my 2 best friends from nursing school. We talked on the phone for hours, laughing until we cried. The divorce was finalized. The house was sold. The money was sitting in a new bank account that bore my name, and my name alone. My friend Carol called me last week, full of gossip. She told me that Robert, now fully recovered, had been seen working as a bagger at the local supermarket. The Mustang was gone, sold to pay for legal fees, and his first month's rent on a dingy apartment above a laundromat. No one in town would speak to him. His poker buddies had barred him from their game. He was a pariah, a living ghost haunted by the life he had destroyed. He was finally, truly, a prisoner. Some nights, I sit on my balcony, listening to the waves crash against the shore. I think about the woman I was, the tired, devoted saint who believed her life was over. She seems like a stranger to me now. I don't know if what I did was right or wrong, and I don't care. I know that it was necessary. He didn't just break my heart, he tried to erase my life, to turn me into a non-person, a function, a tool for his own comfort. But he failed. He underestimated the woman he had spent 35 years with. He forgot that before I was his wife, I was a nurse. And a good nurse always knows exactly how to treat a patient. My name is Evelyn, and I have learned that the best cures are not always gentle. Sometimes, the only way to heal is to surgically remove the disease. What would you do in my situation? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your support gives me strength. For more life stories like this one, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I have so many more chapters to share. Thank you for listening.